They told me I wasn't dressed appropriately for my own son's corporate gala. Mrs. Chen, perhaps you'd be more comfortable in the staff area, the event coordinator said, her smile sharp as broken crystal. My daughter-in-law, Victoria, stood behind her, arms crossed, wearing a dress that cost more than my monthly pension. "We can't have her mingling with the investors, Marcus," she whispered to my son, loud enough for me to hear. "Your mother's simplicity might raise questions about our background." Marcus, my only child, the boy I'd raised alone after his father died, looked at his Italian leather shoes and said nothing. Not a word in my defense, not a single glance of recognition that I was even human, let alone the woman who'd sacrificed everything so he could stand in that room wearing a $10,000 suit. The Vancouver Convention Center glittered around us, all steel and glass overlooking the harbor. Chandeliers like frozen waterfalls, servers in black carrying champagne that probably cost more per bottle than I spent on groceries in a month. And there I stood in my navy blazer from the Bay, bought on sale 3 years ago, suddenly feeling like an ink stain on expensive linen. "There's seating in the back corner," the coordinator continued, gesturing toward a section near the kitchen doors, partially hidden by a decorative screen. "You'll still be able to see everything." I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab my son by those perfect lapels and ask him when exactly he'd learned to be ashamed of where he came from. Instead, I held my purse tighter, feeling the cheap leather crack under my fingers, and nodded. "Of course," I said quietly. I wouldn't want to embarrass anyone. As I walked toward that corner, heels clicking on marble that reflected my tired face, I heard Victoria laugh. That crystalline sound she'd perfected for social occasions, the sound of someone who'd never known what it meant to choose between paying the electric bill or buying your child new shoes for school. But then, just as I reached that horrible little corner they'd carved out for me, someone took my elbow, gentle but firm. A man's voice, low and certain, spoke near my ear. "Eleanor Chen, I've been looking everywhere for you." I turned, my heart stopping for reasons I couldn't immediately name. The man was perhaps 70, silver hair swept back, wearing a suit that whispered wealth rather than shouted it. His eyes were steel gray, sharp and knowing, with crow's feet that suggested he smiled often. But it was something else that made my breath catch, something familiar in the angle of his jaw, the way he held himself. "I'm sorry," I stammered. "Do I know you?" His smile was small, private, meant only for me. "Let's pretend you do. Let's pretend we came here together tonight, and that corner over there," he nodded toward my assigned humiliation, "was never meant for someone like you." Before I could respond, he guided me, not toward the back, but toward the front section reserved for VIPs. Heads turned. I saw the event coordinator's mouth fall open, Victoria's face drained of color. Marcus looked like he'd seen a ghost materialize in his carefully constructed new life. The man pulled out a chair for me at a table marked "Reserved" with a small brass placard. Around us sat people I recognized from business magazines, names that appeared in the financial section of newspapers. "Who are you?" I whispered as he sat beside me, his hand resting lightly on the back of my chair. He turned to me then, and in the light from the chandelier above, I finally saw him, the boy from 45 years ago, now wearing the face of a man who'd lived a full life without me. "Someone who should have found you decades ago," he said softly. "Someone who once promised to come back to Vancouver and never did. Until tonight." My hands started shaking. I set them in my lap, pressed them together until my knuckles went white. "James?" The name came out barely audible, a whisper from another lifetime. "James Morrison?" He nodded, eyes never leaving mine. I tried to find you, Eleanor, after Oxford, after I came back, but you'd married. You'd moved on, and I thought I was too late. The room spun around me. 45 years collapsed into nothing. I was 23 again, sitting in Stanley Park with a young man who talked about changing the world, who kissed me under the cherry blossoms and promised he'd return from England with a ring, who then vanished into silence, leaving me with unanswered letters and a broken heart that eventually learned to beat for someone else. This is Revenge Stories with Michelle, a home for quiet courage and true endings. If you feel my words, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your voice matters here. Your story matters too. You disappeared, I said, my voice stronger now. I wrote you every week for 6 months. Nothing came back. My mother said you'd probably met someone richer, someone better suited to your ambitions. James's face tightened with something that looked like anger, but not at me. I wrote you 37 letters, he said. Every single one returned, marked addressee unknown. I called the number I had, got a recording that it was disconnected. When I flew back early from my program, your mother told me you were engaged to Robert Chen and that you'd asked her to tell me not to contact you again. The words hit me like a physical blow. I thought of my mother, strict and controlling, who'd always said James was too ambitious, too risky, not the kind of man who builds a stable life, who'd pushed me toward Robert, kind and steady Robert, who worked at the credit union and came from a good Chinese family and would never break my heart by chasing dreams across an ocean. She lied, I whispered, to both of us. James nodded slowly. I figured that out eventually, years too late. I hired someone to find you in '82, then again in '87. Both times you were married. You had a son. You looked content, so I stayed away. I thought at least one of us had found happiness. Around us, the gala continued. Someone clinked a glass for a toast, waiters circulated with canapes. But in our small bubble, time had bent backward and forward simultaneously, showing us what was and what might have been. Were you happy? James asked. With Robert? I thought about my late husband. Good, decent Robert who'd provided stability and never raised his voice and died of a heart attack at 58, leaving me with a paid-off house and a son who'd learned somewhere along the way that money mattered more than loyalty. Happy enough, I said finally. He was kind. We had a good life, simple but good. And your son? The question was gentle, but I saw James glance toward Marcus, who stood across the room with Victoria, both of them staring at us with expressions I couldn't quite read. Marcus used to bring me dandelions from the schoolyard, I said, my voice catching. He'd present them so seriously, like they were roses. He'd say, "Mama, these are for you because you work harder than anyone." I don't know where that boy went. James's hand found mine on the table. His palm was warm, solid. He's still in there somewhere, but right now he needs to remember where he came from, and the people watching us need to understand they made a very serious mistake tonight. I looked at our joined hands, his expensive watch catching the light, my own wrist bare except for the marks where my old Timex used to sit before. It finally died last year. "Why are you here tonight?" I asked. "Of all the places, of all the nights, how?" He smiled. That same smile from 45 years ago that had made me believe in possibilities. Chen Innovations is about to pitch for venture capital from Morrison Pacific Holdings, my company. I came to evaluate whether Marcus Chen understands value and integrity, whether he's someone I'd want to invest $75 million in. The number made my head spin. $75 million. The kind of money that built empires. The kind of money my son desperately needed if the rumors I'd overheard in his last awkward phone call were true. Chen Innovations was overextended, bleeding cash, one failed quarter from serious trouble. And now? I asked. James looked across the room at Marcus, who'd started walking toward us, Victoria trailing behind, her face tight with calculation. Now I'm wondering if the man who shames his own mother in public has any understanding of value at all. Marcus reached our table just as the MC announced dinner would be served shortly. Up close, my son looked older than his 38 years. Stress lines bracketed his mouth. His eyes, once so bright with dreams, looked hard and distant. "Mr. Morrison," he said, extending his hand. His voice carried that careful modulation he'd adopted, all traces of the working-class Vancouver neighborhood where he'd grown up scrubbed away. "We weren't expecting you until the pitch meeting tomorrow. This is an honor." James didn't take his hand, didn't even acknowledge it. Instead, he looked at me. "Eleanor, darling, would you like more wine?" The endearment hung in the air. I saw Marcus's outstretched hand slowly lower. Victoria's eyes narrowed. "I'm fine, thank you," I managed to say. James turned then to Marcus, his expression pleasant but cold in a way that made me think of winter lakes, beautiful and dangerous. "You must be Eleanor's son. She's told me so much about you over dinner." It was a lie, of course. We'd barely been sitting for 5 minutes, but Marcus didn't know that I watched the calculation flash across his face. Dinner. Together. James Morrison, one of the wealthiest venture capitalists in Western Canada, having dinner with his mother. The mother he'd just tried to hide in the back corner. Mom, I didn't realize you knew Mr. Morrison." Marcus's voice had changed. Uncertain now, Victoria stepped forward, her smile dazzling and utterly fake. "Mrs. Chen, what a wonderful surprise. We were just looking for you to introduce you to some of our guests." The lie was so transparent it was almost insulting, but James simply raised an eyebrow. How thoughtful. "Though Eleanor has been quite comfortable here at the VIP table. Haven't you, darling?" I looked up at my son. Really looked at him, at the man he'd become, who measured people by their clothes and connections, who'd learned to smile while calculating your net worth. And something in me that had been bending for years finally snapped straight. "Actually," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded, "I've been having a lovely evening. James and I have quite a lot of catching up to do." I used his first name deliberately, letting it land like a small bomb. Marcus's face went pale. "I see," he said slowly. Victoria's hand tightened on his arm. "Perhaps we could all have dinner together? There's so much to discuss before tomorrow's pitch." James stood, buttoning his jacket with casual elegance. "I'm afraid Eleanor and I have other plans. Dinner at Blue Water Cafe. We have a 45-year conversation to finish." He helped me to my feet, his hand steady on my elbow. "But, Mr. Morrison, the pitch, Marcus started. "Is at 9 tomorrow morning in my office," James finished. "I suggest you be on time." "And Marcus?" He paused, letting my son feel the full weight of his attention. "Perhaps spend tonight thinking about what it means to build something of actual value, something you'd be proud to show your mother, something that doesn't require hiding where you came from." We walked away then, James and I, moving through that glittering crowd toward the exit. Behind us, I heard the murmur of voices rising, speculation spreading like ripples across water. I didn't look back. Not at the son who'd tried to erase me from his story. Not at the daughter-in-law who'd measured my worth in designer labels. The night air off Vancouver Harbor was cold and sharp, carrying the smell of salt water and possibility. James's car, a sleek silver Mercedes, waited at the curb. He opened my door, and for a moment we just looked at each other. "I can't believe you're really here," I said. "I can't believe they tried to put you in a corner," he replied, anger finally edging his voice. "Like you were something to be ashamed of. Like the woman who raised that man wasn't worthy of respect." I slid into the car's leather interior, breathing in the scent of expensive things I'd never expected to touch again. As James pulled away from the curb, the convention center receding in the side mirror, I felt something strange bloom in my chest. Not quite happiness, not quite revenge. Something cleaner, like justice. "Tell me everything," James said as we drove through the city lights. "Tell me about the 45 years we lost." So I did. I told him about marrying Robert 3 months after my mother said James wasn't coming back, about the small wedding at the church on Kingsway, how I wore my mother's altered dress and held lilies instead of the roses I'd always dreamed of, how Robert had been gentle and kind, and how I'd learned to love him in a quiet, grateful way that never quite reached the heights of what I'd felt at 23 in Stanley Park, with cherry blossoms falling like snow. I told him about Marcus's birth, the joy and terror of holding this small life and knowing I'd do anything to give him opportunities I'd never had, about Robert working 2 jobs so I could stay home those first years, about going back to work as a library assistant when Marcus started school, how I'd loved being surrounded by books and the smell of paper and ink, how I'd worked there for 32 years until my retirement 3 years ago. "Robert died 7 years ago," I said quietly. "Heart attack sudden. He was at work and then he just wasn't." James's hand found mine across the console. "I'm sorry." He was a good man. He deserved better than a wife who sometimes still dreamed about cherry blossoms and promises made by someone else. "Don't," James said firmly. "Don't do that to yourself. You built a life. You raised a son. You honored your commitments. That's more than many people manage." "And you?" I asked. "Did you marry? Have children?" He shook his head. "Came close a few times, but I always found myself comparing them to a girl I knew for one summer in Vancouver, a girl who read Margaret Atwood in the park and laughed at my terrible jokes and made me believe I could be better than I was. No one else ever quite measured up." The confession sat between us, heavy with years and what-ifs. Blue Water Cafe appeared ahead, its windows glowing warm against the dark harbor. James valeted the car and we walked in together, his hand light on my back. The maitre d' greeted him by name. "Mr. Morrison, welcome back, your usual table." We were led to a corner overlooking the water. White tablecloth, candlelight, a single rose in a crystal vase. It felt surreal. This morning, I'd been in my small house in East Van, watering the tomato plants Robert had loved, wearing my old cardigan and wondering if I should spend money on new shoes. Now I sat across from a ghost made flesh, a path not taken suddenly illuminated after decades of darkness. "Order anything," James said, smiling. "Everything's wonderful here." I looked at the menu and felt my chest tighten. No prices listed. The kind of place where if you had to ask, you couldn't afford it. "James, Eleanor, when was the last time someone took care of you, really took care of you?" The question cut through my protest. I couldn't remember. Robert had been kind but frugal, always saving for someday. Marcus had been too busy climbing social ladders to notice his mother eating less so he could have new hockey equipment. After Robert died, there'd been no one. Just me and the pension and the small house and the careful budgeting that made each month work. "Order the halibut," James said gently. "It's incredible here. And we'll get the oysters to start, and a bottle of that Chardonnay you liked 45 years ago. You remember? From that little wine bar on Davie Street?" I did remember suddenly, sharply. The taste of cold white wine and possibility. The feeling that the whole world was opening up before us. "You remember what wine I liked 45 years ago?" "I remember everything about you, Eleanor. The way you bit your lower lip when you were thinking. How you always ordered your coffee with too much cream. The sound you made when you laughed, really laughed. Not that polite sound women are taught to make everything. The server came, and James ordered for both of us, his voice easy and certain. When we were alone again, he leaned forward. "Tell me what happened tonight, not just the surface. Tell me what that was really about." So I did. I told him how Marcus had changed after he got his MBA, how he'd started dating Victoria, whose family owned a chain of upscale furniture stores, how Victoria had slowly reshaped him, her subtle comments about his background, his accent, his mother's working-class life. She never said anything direct, I explained, just little things, asking Marcus if he'd upgraded his wardrobe for client meetings, wondering aloud if my house in East Van was safe for property values, suggesting that for important business dinners, maybe his background should be simplified. And Marcus went along with it, James said, not a question. I nodded. At first, I told myself he was just trying to fit into her world, that eventually he'd remember who he was. But then the calls became monthly instead of weekly. Then, every few months, always brief, always asking the same surface questions. "Are you well, Mom? Do you need anything? I'm very busy." Like I was an obligation on his calendar. And tonight? Tonight was a corporate gala for potential investors. Marcus's company needs capital, needs it desperately. I heard him on the phone last week when I stopped by his office to drop off his birthday present. He sounded stressed, talking about quarterly losses and market confidence and needing to project success. James's expression hardened. So when his working-class mother showed up in her off-the-rack blazer, she became a liability. "They tried to hide me," I said simply, like I was something shameful, like the 38 years I spent raising Marcus, working 2 jobs sometimes so he could have music lessons and hockey equipment and university. Like all of that was just embarrassing now. The oysters arrived, perfect on their ice bed. James squeezed lemon over them and handed me the first one. "To the woman who deserves so much better than she's been given," he said. We toasted and ate in comfortable silence for a moment. Then James spoke again. Morrison Pacific Holdings was prepared to offer Chen Innovations a $75 million investment. We'd completed our due diligence. The technology is solid. The market potential is strong. I came tonight to meet Marcus personally, to see if he had the character to match his business plan. He paused. I think I got my answer. My stomach dropped. "James, you can't punish his business because of how he treated me. That's not fair to his employees, his team." "Fair?" James's voice was quiet but sharp. "What's fair, Eleanor? Is it fair that he tried to hide you? Is it fair that he's learned to value appearances over integrity? Is it fair that he's built a company culture that probably mirrors his personal values, where people are judged by their polish rather than their substance?" I had no answer. James reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm not going to tank his company out of spite, but I am going to make him understand something fundamental. That respect isn't optional. That how you treat people, especially the people who sacrificed everything for you, matters, that sometimes the bill for your choices comes due." "What are you going to do?" I asked. He smiled, and I saw both the boy I'd loved and the powerful man he'd become. "I'm going to the pitch meeting tomorrow, and I'm going to ask your son some very specific questions about ethics, integrity, and corporate values. I'm going to ask him to tell me about the most important person in his life and what he's learned from them. And then I'm going to decide if his answers match his actions." The halibut arrived, perfectly grilled, and we talked about other things. About his years building Morrison Pacific from nothing, about the companies he'd helped grow, the people he'd mentored. He told me about living in London and Hong Kong and San Francisco, about the loneliness of success without someone to share it with. "I have a beautiful condo overlooking English Bay," he said, "museum-quality art, a wine collection people would kill for. And most nights I eat cereal standing at the counter because it seems pointless to set a table for one." "I know that feeling," I admitted. "My house is full of Robert's things, his tools in the garage, his favorite chair. But it's so quiet sometimes I leave the TV on just for the noise." We looked at each other across the candle, two people who'd spent decades building lives that hadn't quite fit. "Eleanor," James said slowly, "I'm not going to pretend we can go back 45 years. We can't. We're different people now. But I'd like to know who you've become. I'd like to spend time with you without the weight of all that lost time crushing us. Would that be possible?" My throat tightened. Hope was a dangerous thing at 68. But sitting there, with this man who'd remembered my favorite wine and the way I laughed, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Seen. Not as someone's mother or someone's widow or someone's obligation, just seen. "I'd like that," I said, "very much." We finished dinner slowly, talking about everything and nothing. James told me about a cabin he'd bought on Vancouver Island, about wanting to spend more time there now that he was thinking about succession planning for his company. "I'm 71, he said. "I've spent 50 years building and acquiring and strategizing, and I'm tired of missing sunsets because I'm in meetings." I told him about volunteering at the library, about the reading program I'd started for new immigrant families, about the tomato garden Robert had planted that I still maintained like a shrine. "The house needs work," I admitted. "The roof leaks in one corner. The deck Robert built is rotting, but it's paid off and it's mine and it holds all my memories." "Would you show it to me?" James asked. "Sometime soon?" I felt vulnerable suddenly, thinking of my working-class house with its thrift store furniture and garden variety problems, comparing it to the expensive world James inhabited. But then I remembered sitting in that back corner tonight, remember the shame they'd tried to make me feel, and straightened my shoulders. "Yes," I said firmly, "I'd like that." When the check came, James wouldn't let me even glimpse it. We walked out into the night, the harbor lights reflecting on dark water. His car appeared and we drove through Vancouver's downtown, familiar streets looking different from behind the window of a Mercedes. "Where can I take you?" James asked. I gave him my address in East Van. He drove without comment through neighborhoods that got progressively less polished until we reached my street with its small houses and chain-link fences and cars that were practical rather than prestigious. He walked me to my door, this man in his expensive suit standing on my cracked concrete porch under the light that flickered because I hadn't gotten around to replacing it. "Thank you," I said, "for tonight, for everything." James lifted his hand and brushed his thumb across my cheek. The gesture was so tender I nearly broke. "Tomorrow is going to be interesting," he said. "You should know. Morrison Pacific's headquarters has a viewing gallery, a place where guests can observe pitch meetings without being seen. Would you like to be there when your son presents?" The offer hung in the air. Part of me wanted to say no, wanted to protect Marcus even now. But a larger part, the part that had been shoved in corners and treated as an embarrassment, wanted to see what happened when consequences arrived. "Yes," I said. "I'll be there." James smiled. 9 o'clock. I'll have my assistant meet you in the lobby." He leaned in and kissed my forehead, a ghost of the kiss he'd given me 45 years ago under cherry blossoms. Then he was walking back to his car, and I was turning my key in my old lock, stepping into my small house that suddenly felt different, like something had shifted in the foundation. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in the bed I'd shared with Robert, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through everything. James Morrison. Back in my life, like time had folded, Marcus and his shame and his carefully constructed image. The pitch meeting tomorrow, where worlds would collide around 3 a.m., I got up and made tea. Sat at my kitchen table where Marcus had done his homework, where Robert had read the paper every morning, where I'd planned meals on a tight budget and dreamed small, careful dreams. Tomorrow, I'd walk into James Morrison's world as an invited guest, not a liability. I'd watch my son face the consequences of his choices, and somewhere in all of that, I'd decide what kind of mother I wanted to be going forward. One who enabled bad behavior for the sake of family peace, or one who demanded respect, even if it meant letting her child fail. The tea grew cold in my cup. Outside, Vancouver slept. Inside, Eleanor Chen, 68-year-old widow and retired library assistant, steel-haired and tough-minded, made her choice. At 8:30 the next morning, I stood outside Morrison Pacific Holdings headquarters, looking up at the glass tower. I dressed carefully in my best outfit, navy dress and matching blazer, a string of pearls Robert had given me for our 20th anniversary. Not expensive, but respectable. My own armor. A young woman met me in the lobby. "Mrs. Chen, I'm Priya, Mr. Morrison's executive assistant. He asked me to bring you up." The elevator rocketed skyward. My stomach dropped with the acceleration. We emerged on the 32nd floor into a world of hushed efficiency. Modern art on the walls. Floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city and mountains beyond. Priya led me to a small room adjacent to a large conference space. Through one-way glass, I could see the conference table, the leather chairs, the presentation screen. James sat at the head of the table, flanked by two other executives. Marcus hadn't arrived yet. "Can I get you coffee, Mrs. Chen?" "Water," Priya asked. "Water would be lovely, thank you." She left and I settled into the comfortable chair, facing the glass. My heart hammered. What was I doing here? What mother watches her son's business pitch like it's a spectator sport? But then I remembered Victoria's crystalline laugh, Marcus's averted eyes, the corner they'd tried to stuff me in, and I stayed seated. James looked up then, directly at the glass. He couldn't see me, I knew that, but he nodded slightly, as if he knew I was there, as if he was saying, "You're not alone this time." At 8:55, Marcus arrived with Victoria and two other team members. My son looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes. Victoria's smile was bright, but I could see tension in her shoulders. They settled around the table, arranging laptops and presentation materials. At exactly 9, James spoke. I couldn't hear through the glass, but Priya had left me a small earpiece connected to the room's audio. I slipped it in. "Good morning," James's voice came through, professional and cool. "Thank you for coming. Before we discuss the particulars of your technology and market strategy, I'd like to start with some broader questions about corporate culture and values." Marcus nodded, confident this was his territory, building narratives, selling visions. "Of course, Mr. Morrison. At Chen Innovations, we believe that integrity and excellence are inseparable. We've built our company culture on respect, innovation, and—" "Tell me about respect," James interrupted quietly. "What does that mean to you personally, Mr. Chen?" I watched Marcus's face through the glass. He didn't pause, launched into what was clearly a rehearsed answer about respecting clients, respecting employees, respecting market dynamics. James let him finish. Then, "And family? How do you demonstrate respect for family?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Marcus's confident expression flickered. Of course, family is extremely important. Work-life balance, supporting our team members' personal lives." "I'm asking about your family," James said, "specifically your mother." The room went silent. Victoria's head snapped toward Marcus. The other team members looked confused. "My mother?" Marcus's voice was carefully controlled. "I'm not sure I understand the relevance to our pitch, Mr. Morrison." "Humor me," James said, his tone pleasant but immovable. "Tell me about Eleanor Chen. What has she taught you about integrity and respect?" I watched my son's throat work as he swallowed. "My mother is a remarkable woman. She worked very hard to give me opportunities. I'm very grateful for her sacrifices." "Are you?" James leaned back in his chair. "Grateful enough to acknowledge her in public, to introduce her proudly to business associates, or is she something you prefer to keep simplified?" The word hit like a slap. Marcus's face drained of color. He knew. Somehow, he knew exactly what had happened last night. "Mr. Morrison, I don't—" Marcus started. "I was at your gala last night," James continued, his voice still pleasant, still professional, but with an edge that could cut glass. "I had the pleasure of meeting your mother. Do you know where I found her? In a corner near the kitchen service area. Because apparently, her working-class background might raise questions about your family's social standing." Victoria's face went rigid. The other team members looked at each other, clearly wanting to be anywhere else. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "There was a misunderstanding about seating arrangements," he finally managed. "It was never intended—" "Wasn't it?" James interrupted. "Because from where I stood, it looked very intentional. It looked like a man who's so desperate to be seen as successful that he's willing to hide the person who made that success possible." I gripped the arms of my chair, watching my son squirm. Part of me wanted to rush in there, to stop this public humiliation, but another part, the part that had been humiliated last night, stayed frozen. "Mr. Morrison, with respect, my personal life." Marcus tried again. "Is absolutely relevant," James cut in, "because Morrison Pacific doesn't just invest in technology, Mr. Chen. We invest in people, in leaders, in individuals who understand that how you treat people when they can't benefit you tells us everything about your character." He stood then, gathering his papers. "Your technology is impressive. Your market analysis is solid. Your financial projections are reasonable. But I've seen enough to know that Chen Innovations isn't a company I want in our portfolio." Marcus shot to his feet. "Mr. Morrison, please. We can address any concerns you have. If this is about last night, I can explain." "Can you?" James's voice was quiet now, almost gentle. "Can you explain why you were ashamed of the woman who raised you? Can you explain what message that sends about your values? Because from where I sit, it tells me you're someone who abandons people when they become inconvenient, and that's not someone I do business with." Victoria stood, her voice sharp with desperation. "Mr. Morrison, surely one incident shouldn't define an entire business relationship." Marcus has apologized. "We all recognize there was a misunderstanding." "There was no misunderstanding," James said flatly. "There was a choice. Your husband chose to prioritize image over integrity, comfort over courage, and now he's choosing to minimize and rationalize rather than take actual responsibility." He moved toward the door, then paused. "I'll tell you what, Mr. Chen, I'm going to make you an offer, not an investment offer, a different kind of offer." The room held its breath. "Tomorrow at noon, there's a community lunch at the St. James Community Center in East Vancouver. Your mother volunteers there every week, serving meals to people experiencing homelessness. I'll be there as well. If you show up, spend 2 hours serving alongside your mother, and can look me in the eye afterward and tell me you understand what you did wrong, I'll reconsider, not guarantee anything, but reconsider." Marcus stared at him. "You want me to serve lunch at a homeless shelter as a condition of investment?" "I want you to spend 2 hours in your mother's world," James corrected. "The world she never tried to hide from you. The world she taught you came from. And then we'll see if you've learned anything about actual value." He nodded to the room. "You have until noon tomorrow. My assistant will send you the address." Then James walked out, leaving stunned silence in his wake. Through the glass, I watched Marcus sink into his chair. Victoria immediately started talking, her hands moving animatedly, clearly strategizing. The other team members looked shell-shocked. I removed the earpiece with shaking hands. The door behind me opened and James entered. "You heard everything?" I nodded, unable to speak. "I'm sorry if that was too harsh," he said quietly. "But Eleanor, that man needs to face what he's become. And more importantly, you need to see that you have nothing to be ashamed of nothing." I stood, legs unsteady. "You just destroyed his chance at the funding he needs." "No," James corrected gently. "I gave him a chance to earn it back by becoming someone worthy of it, someone his mother could be proud of." My eyes filled with tears. "James, I don't know if he'll come tomorrow. Victoria will tell him it's beneath him, that you're manipulating him, that—" "Then he'll fail," James said simply, "and you'll know exactly where you stand. But Eleanor, I think there's still some of that little boy in there, the one who brought you dandelions. He just needs to remember why that mattered." We stood there in that observation room high above Vancouver, two people trying to right old wrongs, trying to build something true from the wreckage of what might have been. "Will you be there tomorrow?" I asked. "At St. James?" "I'll be there," James promised. "We'll be there together, and whatever Marcus decides, you're not facing it alone anymore." He drove me home. Neither of us spoke much, but his hand found mine across the console and held it. When we reached my house, he walked me to the door again. "Eleanor, regardless of what happens tomorrow, I want you to know something. These past 2 days, being with you again, it's made me remember who I wanted to be when I was 26. Someone who valued the right things. Someone who didn't let important people slip away." "We lost 45 years," I said quietly. "Yes, and I can't get them back. But I don't want to lose whatever time we have left." He cupped my face in his hands. "Let me take you to dinner Friday, a real date. Not business, not maneuvering your son. Just us, getting to know who we've become." I looked up at this man who'd crashed back into my life like a meteor, who'd defended me when my own son wouldn't, who'd remembered how I took my coffee 45 years ago. "Yes," I said, "I'd like that very much." He kissed me then. Not on the forehead this time, but properly, his lips warm and certain on mine. It was careful and sweet and made my 68-year-old heart race like I was 23 again. When he left, I went inside and sat at my kitchen table for a long time. Tomorrow would determine so much, whether Marcus still had the capacity for growth, whether the bridge between us could ever be repaired. But tonight I had something I hadn't had in years. I had someone who saw me as I was and thought I was worth fighting for. The next morning, I woke with butterflies in my stomach. The St. James Community Center lunch started at 11:30, but I always arrived by 10 to help with prep. Today would be no different, despite the drama. I dressed in my usual volunteer clothes, comfortable jeans and a sweater, sneakers that could handle being on my feet for hours, pulled my hair into a simple ponytail. In the mirror, I looked like myself. No armor, no pretense. Just Eleanor. The community center was busy when I arrived. Tom, the coordinator, greeted me with his usual warm smile. "Eleanor, thank God. We've got a larger group today and Danny called in sick. Think you can handle the serving line?" "Of course," I said, tying on my apron. The work was familiar and grounding, cutting vegetables for the salad-filling water pitchers, setting out plates and utensils on the long tables. Around me, other volunteers moved efficiently. We were a mixed group, retirees and students, people from the neighborhood and people from fancy areas who drove in to help. No one cared about labels here. At 11, James arrived. He'd dressed down, jeans and a casual shirt, but he still carried that air of quiet authority. Tom's eyes widened slightly. "Mr. Morrison, welcome back. Good to see you again." "Been a few months," James said easily. Thought it was time I stopped writing checks and actually showed up. He moved beside me at the prep counter, picking up a knife to help with vegetables. Our shoulders brushed. He smiled at me, and something warm settled in my chest. At 11:30, the doors opened and people began filing in. The homeless, the working poor, families stretched too thin, elderly folks on fixed incomes. People from all the corners of life that polite society preferred not to see. I moved to the serving line, ladling soup, smiling at familiar faces, learning new names. This was my world, not glamorous, not prestigious, but real. At 11:45, the door opened and Marcus walked in, alone. He stood in the doorway looking around at the crowded room, the mismatched furniture, the people in worn coats. His expression was unreadable. I caught his eye across the room. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then Tom approached him. "Welcome. First time volunteering?" "Yes," Marcus said quietly. "I'm Eleanor Chen's son." Tom's face lit up. "Eleanor's boy. She talks about you. Come on, let's get you an apron. We need someone on the hot food line." Marcus allowed himself to be led over, took the apron Tom offered. He stood on the other side of James, the three of us forming a line, father and almost father flanking a lost son. "Just serve as people come through," I told him. "Smile. Ask if they want extra vegetables. Treat everyone with dignity." Marcus nodded. His hands were shaking slightly as he picked up the serving spoon. The first few people came through. Marcus served mechanically, not making eye contact. But then a woman with 2 young children reached the line. She looked exhausted, her coat patched with duct tape. One of the kids hung back, shy. "Good afternoon," the woman said quietly. "Could my daughter have extra vegetables? She really likes carrots." "Of course," Marcus said, and I heard his voice crack slightly. He heaped vegetables onto the small plate, then looked at the child. "You like carrots?" "Me too. My mom used to make them with honey." The little girl smiled. "That sounds good." Marcus watched them move down the line, his face stricken. I knew what he was seeing. People not so different from the families we'd lived among when he was small, people who could have been us if a few breaks had gone differently. For the next hour, we served together. I watched my son slowly transform. The rigid social mask cracked. He started actually seeing the people in front of him, started asking names, making conversation. When an elderly man fumbled his tray, Marcus immediately came around to help, steadying it, making sure nothing spilled. "Thank you, young man," the old man said. "You're very kind." Marcus's eyes were wet when he returned to the line. At 1:30, the crowd had thinned. Tom gave us the signal we could break for our own lunch. We sat at one of the tables, the 3 of us, eating the same soup and bread we'd served. "Your mother has been volunteering here every Thursday for 6 years," James said conversationally. "She started a reading program for kids whose families can't afford books. Set up a little library in the corner over there. Some of those kids, this is the only hot meal they get all week." Marcus stared at his soup. "I didn't know." "You didn't ask," I said quietly. "You didn't ask what I did with my time. You didn't ask what mattered to me. You didn't ask anything that might not fit into the story you'd decided to tell about yourself." My son's shoulders shook. When he looked up, tears streaked his face. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I was ashamed of everything I came from. Victoria's family, they made me feel like I had to erase my past to deserve a future, and I let them. I let myself believe that you were something to hide instead of everything I should be proud of." "Why?" I asked. "Why did you let them change you?" Because I was scared, Marcus said, his voice breaking. Scared I'd fail, scared I wouldn't measure up, scared that if people knew I came from nothing, they wouldn't take me seriously. So I tried to become someone else, someone better. Someone worse, James corrected gently. You tried to become someone worse, Marcus, because the person you were, the boy Eleanor raised with love and sacrifice, he knew better. He knew that dignity isn't about designer clothes or exclusive addresses. He knew that the measure of a man is how he treats people who can't do anything for him. Marcus nodded, wiping his eyes with his napkin. I know that now, watching the people come through that line, seeing how Mom treated each one like they mattered. I remembered when we used to go to the food bank sometimes, when Dad was between jobs, how scared I felt, how Mom held my hand and told me we were just going through a hard patch, but we'd be okay. You were 8, I said softly, and you were so brave. I forgot that, Marcus whispered. I forgot what it felt like to be on the other side, to be the one people look through instead of at. We sat in silence for a moment. Around us, volunteers cleaned tables and put away supplies, life continuing in its steady rhythm. Finally, James spoke. Marcus, I'm not going to invest in Chen Innovations. My son nodded, accepting the judgment. But, James continued, I am going to offer you something else, mentorship, not funding, but guidance. Because I see something in you that's worth saving. Not the polished executive you've been trying to be, but the man who just cried over a little girl who likes carrots. Marcus looked up, hope and confusion warring in his expression. I don't understand. Morrison Pacific runs an accelerator program for companies with potential but weak leadership. It's intensive. It's humbling. It requires you to completely rebuild your corporate culture and your personal character. 6 months full-time. At the end, if you've done the work, we revisit investment. James paused. But here's the condition. Every Thursday for those 6 months, you're here, serving lunch, remembering where you came from and what matters. And every Thursday, your mother is here watching whether you show up. I'll do it, Marcus said immediately. Whatever it takes, I'll do it. James looked at me. Eleanor, this is ultimately your call. Are you willing to give him this chance? Because if you say no, I'll respect that. You don't owe him anything. I looked at my son, at the red eyes and desperate hope, at the man who'd hurt me and the boy I still loved somewhere underneath all the damage. I'm willing, I said slowly. But Marcus, you need to understand, I'm not going to make this easy. I'm not going to let you perform forgiveness while your heart stays closed. If you want to rebuild our relationship, you're going to have to do the actual work, not the appearance of work, the real thing. I understand, Marcus said. And Mom, I know this doesn't fix anything, but thank you for not giving up on me completely. We stood. Marcus hesitated, then stepped forward and hugged me. A real hug, not the stiff, obligatory embraces he'd been giving me for years. I let myself hold him for a moment, this child who'd broken my heart and maybe was starting to find his way back. When we left the community center, Victoria was waiting in the parking lot. She got out of her BMW, her expression anxious. Marcus, we need to talk about next steps. I've been making calls. There are other investors. Victoria, Marcus interrupted gently. I'm going to do the accelerator program. 6 months. And I need you to understand something. My mother is no longer someone we hide or apologize for. She's my mother. She's a huge part of my story. And if you can't accept that, we have a serious problem. Victoria's face tightened. She looked at me, at James, back to Marcus. Are you seriously going to let these people dictate our lives? These people? Marcus shook his head. Victoria, that's my mother, and Mr. Morrison is giving me a chance I don't deserve. If you can't see that, then maybe we need to rethink some things. I watched Victoria calculate. She was smart enough to see the power dynamic had shifted. Of course, she said, her voice brittle. I just want what's best for you, Marcus, for us. But her eyes, when they slid to me, held resentment. I recognized that look. This wasn't over, but it was a start. James drove me home for the third time in 3 days. My small house looked different now. Not shabby or embarrassing, just mine. The tomato plants needed watering. The porch light still flickered. The paint was chipped. And none of it mattered because I'd stopped apologizing for my life. Come in, I said. I'll make coffee. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd worried over bills and helped with homework and eaten dinners alone after Robert died. Now James Morrison sat across from me, looking around at the modest space with genuine interest. This is a good house, he said. You can feel it. Feel the life that's been lived here. It's not much, I started. Eleanor, he interrupted. Stop. Stop diminishing yourself and your life. This house is filled with love and work and dignity. That's worth more than marble countertops and designer furniture. I nodded, letting his words settle. What happens now? I asked. With Marcus. With the program. Now he does the hardest thing he's ever done, James said. He looks at himself honestly. He rebuilds his company culture from the ground up. He shows up every Thursday to serve lunch and remember what matters. And at the end of 6 months, we see if he's someone worth investing in. And if he fails, then he fails. But Eleanor, you'll know you gave him every chance. And more importantly, you'll know you didn't compromise your self-respect for his comfort. I reached across the table and took his hand. Thank you for fighting for me, for seeing me. I'd forgotten what that felt like. Get used to it, James said, his thumb stroking my knuckles, because I'm not going anywhere, not again, not ever. We sat there in my small kitchen as afternoon light slanted through the window, highlighting the cracks in the linoleum and the faded curtains and the absolutely beautiful truth that sometimes, after 45 years, you get a second chance. Friday night, James took me to dinner at a quiet Italian place in Kitsilano. No business, no family drama, just two people who'd found their way back to each other across decades of regret. Tell me about the person you became, James said over wine. Not Eleanor the mother or Eleanor the wife. You, the person inside all those roles. I thought about it. I became someone who believed making others comfortable was more important than being true to myself. I learned to be small, to not ask for too much, to be grateful for crumbs. And somewhere along the way, I lost sight of the girl who read Margaret Atwood in the park and believed she could do anything. I still see her, James said quietly. That girl, she's still there, just buried under years of other people's expectations. What about you? I asked. Who did you become? Someone successful and lonely, he admitted. Someone who conquered markets but never figured out how to be vulnerable, who built an empire but forgot to build a life. He reached across the table. Eleanor, I don't know what this is. I don't know if we're picking up where we left off or starting something completely new. But I know I don't want to waste whatever time we have left being careful or afraid. Neither do I said. And I meant it. This is Revenge Stories with Michelle, a home for quiet courage and true endings. If you feel my words, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your voice matters here. Your story matters too. The next 6 months unfolded in ways I couldn't have predicted. Marcus showed up every Thursday without fail. At first, Victoria came with him, her designer handbag looking absurdly out of place in the community center. But after a few weeks, she stopped coming. Marcus came alone. I watched my son slowly transform. He learned people's names, remembered their stories. He started treating the Thursday lunch not as penance, but as the most important meeting of his week. The accelerator program was brutal. James had him rebuilding every system in his company, questioning every assumption, learning to lead through values instead of fear and image. I heard about it in our Sunday dinners, which had resumed. Marcus started coming to my house. Just him, no Victoria. We'd cook together, slowly rebuilding trust over chopped vegetables and shared memories. "She doesn't understand," Marcus said one evening. "Victoria. She thinks I'm having some kind of breakdown. She keeps pushing me to look for other investors, to skip Thursdays, to get back to normal." "And what do you think?" I asked. "I think normal was destroying me," he said quietly. "I think I was becoming someone Dad would have been ashamed of, someone you should have been ashamed of." "I was never ashamed of you, Marcus. I was hurt. There's a difference." He nodded. "I know that now. And Mom, I'm sorry. I'm sorry it took a stranger shaming me publicly to wake me up. I'm sorry I hurt you. I'm sorry for all the years I made you feel small so I could feel big." I hugged him. My son. My complicated, flawed, growing son. Meanwhile, James and I were writing our own story. He took me to the cabin on Vancouver Island one weekend. We walked beaches and cooked simple meals and talked for hours. "I wasted so many years," I told him, "watching the sunset paint the ocean gold. We both did. But Eleanor, waste would be having this chance and not taking it. That would be waste." He proposed to me in month 5. Not with a grand gesture, just sitting on my lumpy couch watching a documentary about wildlife. "Marry me," he said during a commercial. "I've waited 45 years. I don't want to wait anymore." I laughed, then cried. Yes, absolutely yes. Even though I'm 71 and probably have weird old man habits, I'm 68 with weird old lady habits. We'll figure it out. We married quietly 3 months later. Small ceremony at the community center, actually, surrounded by the people from Thursday lunches, and a handful of close friends. Marcus was there, without Victoria. They'd separated 2 months earlier, her final ultimatum that he choose between his new life and her. He chose the new life. At the 6-month mark, Marcus presented his revised business plan to Morrison Pacific. I wasn't in the observation room this time. I was at the table, invited by James's family as someone whose opinion mattered. Marcus's presentation was different. Instead of just numbers and projections, he talked about corporate responsibility, about treating employees like humans, about measuring success in more than quarterly profits. "Chen Innovations is going to be a company I can be proud of," he said. "Not just successful, but ethical. Not just profitable, but purposeful. The kind of company my father would have respected and my mother can be proud of." James looked at his fellow board members, then at me. I nodded slightly. "Congratulations, Marcus," James said. "Morrison Pacific is prepared to offer $40 million in funding, with clear expectations around corporate governance and culture. Welcome to the portfolio." Marcus's eyes welled up. "Thank you, sir. I won't let you down." "Don't thank me," James said. "Thank your mother. She's the one who never gave up believing there was still something worth saving in you." Marcus looked at me across that gleaming conference table. "I know," he said simply, "and I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving she was right." That evening, James and I drove home to the house in West Vancouver we'd bought together, a compromise between his expensive condo and my modest East Van bungalow, big enough for comfort, small enough to feel like home. "You did it," he said. "Did what?" "Raised a good man. He got lost for a while, but the foundation you built, it held. He found his way back." I thought about that. About all the years of sacrifice, the nights worrying over bills, The moments I doubted whether any of it mattered. "We did it," I corrected. "You gave him the push he needed, the accountability." "We make a good team," James said. "Always did. Just took us 45 years to figure it out. I still volunteer at St. James every Thursday. James comes too. Marcus still shows up, but now he brings other young executives from his company, teaching them what he learned about perspective and humility and remembering where they came from. My life looks nothing like I expected at 68. I'm married to my first love, watching my son rebuild himself into someone I'm proud of, splitting time between Vancouver and the island, feeling seen and valued every single day. Sometimes Victoria sends messages through Marcus, veiled attempts at reconciliation, now that his company is successful again. I don't respond. Some bridges burn for a reason. On my 69th birthday, James threw a party. Not a big gala, just friends and community center folks and Marcus and some of James's team. Simple food, good wine, laughter that felt real. Tom from St. James gave a speech about the reading program I'd started, how it had grown to serve 3 community centers now. Marcus stood up too, his voice shaking. "I want to say something about my mom," he began. "For a long time, I treated her like an embarrassment, like something I had to overcome to be successful. But the truth is, everything good in me comes from her. The work ethic, the resilience, the belief that people matter more than profit. I forgot that for a while. She never did. Mom, thank you for not giving up on me, even when I'd given up on myself." I cried. Happy tears this time, not the bitter ones I'd shed in corners and quiet moments. After everyone left, James and I sat on our deck overlooking the ocean. Stars scattered across the black sky like possibilities. "Any regrets?" he asked. I thought about it honestly. I regret the years we lost. I regret staying silent for so long when Marcus started treating me badly. I regret believing I was worth less than I am. And now? Now I know better. Now I know that dignity isn't negotiable, that self-respect isn't selfish, that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept mistreatment, even from people you love. James kissed my temple. "I'm proud of you, Eleanor Chen Morrison." "Why?" "Because you stood up. You could have swallowed the hurt and stayed quiet to keep the peace. Instead, you demanded respect. You changed the story. And in doing that, you probably saved your son's soul." I leaned into him, feeling his solid warmth. "I had help," I said. "I had someone who saw me when I'd forgotten how to see myself." "We saw each other," he corrected. "Finally, after all this time." We sat there as night deepened, 2 people who'd taken the long way around to find their way home. The life I have now isn't perfect. Marcus still struggles sometimes. Old habits trying to resurface. James and I navigate the complexities of blending lives after so many years apart. Some of Victoria's family still whisper about the scandal of Marcus dumping his wife for family drama. I don't care, because every morning I wake up next to someone who chooses me, who sees me, who believes I'm worth fighting for. Because every Thursday I serve lunch and remember what matters. Because my son calls not out of obligation, but because he actually wants to know how I'm doing. Because I built a life I'm not ashamed of. Standing in that corner at the gala, I thought my story was about being pushed aside. I thought I was facing my final invisibility, the last cruel chapter where I'd be erased from my son's narrative. But I was wrong. That wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. The moment I stopped accepting being diminished, the moment I remembered I had value independent of anyone else's recognition, the moment James walked back into my life and reminded me I'd once been brave and could be brave again. If you're watching this from your own corner, wherever they've tried to put you, I want you to know something. You don't have to stay there. You don't have to smile while people treat you as less than you are. You don't have to shrink yourself to make others comfortable. You don't have to accept crumbs and call it love. Stand up. Walk out of that corner. Demand the respect you deserve. Will it be easy? No. Will you lose some people? Maybe. But here's what you'll gain: yourself, your dignity, your truth. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you'll find that the people worth keeping will rise to meet you, will transform alongside you, will remember who they're supposed to be. My name is Eleanor Chen Morrison. I'm 69 years old. I was married twice, once to a good man who gave me stability, once to my first love who gave me passion. I raised a son who broke my heart and then found his way back to me. I spent 40 years in a library and the last 6 years serving lunches at a community center. I wear off-the-rack clothes, and I've never had a professional manicure in my life. And I am worth more than anyone's shame could ever diminish. Thank you for walking this journey with me. Thank you for bearing witness. And if my story touched something in you, if it reminded you of your own worth, please share it. Tell someone who needs to hear it. Because the most powerful thing we can do for each other is refuse to be silent about dignity. This is Revenge Stories with Michelle, a home for quiet courage and true endings. If you feel my words, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your voice matters here. Your story matters too. Comment below and let me know. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself when it cost you something? Have you ever walked away from a corner they tried to put you in? I want to hear your story. Because every voice adds to the chorus. Every person who refuses to be diminished makes it easier for the next person to stand up. We're in this together, all of us who've been told we're not enough, who've been pushed aside, who've been treated as embarrassments. We know our worth, and we're not sitting in the back anymore. Until next time, remember this: you were never the problem. Your dignity was never negotiable. And somewhere, someone is waiting to see you stand up so they'll know they can too. Be that person. Stand up. Walk forward. Reclaim yourself. The corner was never where you belonged.